Hello, everyone listening and watching. Most welcome to 1593 of the Heidegger series. We will today finish off with the first sessions of Life, Death, and Jacques Derrida programs, and hopefully be able to go into the next session, Logic of the Living, She the Living. And my idea here is to parallel the text of Köster and Jacques Derrida in order to make a deconstruction of both. See how we can open up the texts, make them shine forward. A little recap, I can think it's in hand, since there's been some 8-9 days in between here. And we've been talking about what has been, so to speak, marginalized in the text of Jacob. And in Jacob, not part of the central argument are things like teleology, I would say even God and spirituality. Life as an essence. Those things are downplayed in the central argument, or the perceived argument as the reader gets it. But Derrida showed them to be very important parts of the text, actually the driving parts that makes you accept the text. Derrida is not making an argument against Jacob in the general sense, normal sense. He's showing that it does actually write these things. There's nothing added by Derrida in the text. He points it out with clarity. Sometimes these parts are literally marginalized, like physically marginalized, but not too seldom, very often actually, they are in the middle of the text. But we still miss them. We still don't see them. Isn't that interesting in itself? And they are the driving force that makes you accept. And it's no little thing, since the approach, the way that is opened up here in the 60s by Jacques Derrida and Jacob is the dominant today. And no one else has pointed these things out. No one. It's assumed that, so to speak, the texts are watertight, unison, speaking of one voice. It's very far from what is actually happening. Religion comes in, he's appealing to religion, he's appealing to spirituality, he's appealing to metaphysics, essentialism. Very important. And this goes for so many texts of modern education or modern ideology. These are the things that makes us accept these texts and made them so powerful. Four horsemen of the apocalypse, of the atheist apocalypse: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Hitchens. I lose the name of the fourth one now, my God. Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins. Now the four ones. They make a very strong argument based on exactly the things that Jacob, Monod, and their successors are making such a strong claims about. They are incredibly important. And this is also has another positive side. It can make every text stronger in this way. Less subjective, so to speak, less pointy, sharpy, less only based on oppositions that actually makes the text dissolve, nullify. The opposites take each other out, making the text to dust. Derrida is reinforcing the text. Enough with introduction. I will now go into the text. And it's the last paragraph in the English translation, page 20 of First Sessions. We're getting into philosophy of life, which is so interesting. Here, the essentialist claims are extra strong. But philosophy of life is a quotation, or at least I'm using it here as a quotation. These are the last words of an article by Cangelham, titled The Concept and Life. An article included in his 1968 Étude d'histoire et de la philosophie des sciences. I recommend that you read this article along with the entire volume, as well as La connaissance de la vie, an earlier work. All of this will be very useful for you from the point of view of agrégation. Philosophy of life, these are then Cangelham's final words at the end of his article. They are not meant pejoratively, and if the entire article aims to demonstrate that contemporary biology is still deeply Aristotelian and Hegelian, this is not to its discredit. Quite the contrary. Here, first are the last lines of this article. Knowledge is thus a restless search for the greatest quantity and variety of information. As a result, to be a subject of knowledge, if the a priori is in things and the concept is in life, is simply to be dissatisfied with the meaning that has been found. Subjectivity, then, is nothing but dissatisfaction but that is perhaps life itself. Contemporary biology, contemporary, you know, read in a certain fashion is, in a way, a philosophy of life. It is also for the sake of finding models of aggregation rhetoric that I recommend that you read Cangelan in order to follow in his work. As in the works of all the epistemologists of the French school, some of the effects of the aggregation, the effects of French schooling, it would not take much explaining to hear the whole context of the quotation I just read. Philosophy of life as school of life. Contemporary biology as school of life. But what interests me most here is a particular phase in the trajectory that leads Kangelem to this conclusion. This phase intersects in a very specific place Jacob's argumentation. And even a reference by Jacob to Claude Bernard. Jacob's reference to Claude Bernard concerns the project indeed. The other characteristic of the program, along with memory, in parenthesis memory as DNA, or the flexible brain memory, end of my parenthesis. The point here is to show that the program acts like a pre-established design, a plan, without any subjective, physical, psychical intention, and that the notion of program resolves the classical contradiction between, on the one hand, listen up, a mechanism without plan, without reflecting the effects of teleology, and on the other, a finality that has always been attributed to some teleological providence or intentional consciousness, etc. Very well quotable. Smaller site. Yes, he did. He quotes a long passage from lectures on the phenomena of life common to animals and plants, where Bernard speaks of a predetermined plan and design. The passage concludes, there is a kind of pre-established design for each being and each organ, so that considered in isolation, each phenomenon of the harmonious arrangement depends on the general forces of nature, but taken in relationship with the others, it reveals a special bond. Some invisible guide seems to direct it along the path it follows, leading it to the place which it occupies. There it is out in the open. And Jacob then adds, not a word of these lines needs to be changed today. They contain nothing which modern biology cannot endorse. However, when heredity is described as a coded program in a sequence of chemical radicals, the paradox disappears. And since, and this is a topic we will study next time, it is through reproduction that Jacob defines the living, which he wants to distinguish from life, a term he sets aside in order to avoid its hypostasis. He writes further on, the program is scrupulously recopied, sign by sign, from one generation to another. Compare here with Custer. The original, the Quran of the original. It is with regard to this semiotics that I would like to cross Jacob's text with Cangelam's. Cangelam too, after having quoted Claude Bernard, who speaks of the manifestation here and now of a primitive impulse and of an instructional sign, also well quotable. A primitive impulse coming from no intention, matter itself, but still having the essence of want, teleology, life, intention. Cangelam then adds, Claude Bernard seems to have sensed that biological heredity consists in the transmission of something that is today called coded information. But Cangelam emphasizes that if an instructional sign is not far from a code, at least semantically, one cannot conclude that the semantic analogy corresponds to a real filiation of concepts. What follows is an analysis. We will read it closely next time. That is as interesting as it is labored. One that tries to show that although Claude Bernard does not have the concepts of modern biology at his disposal, he tries to make up for this with metaphors. And Canguilhem comes to the following conclusion, which I quote in anticipation of the problems we will discuss next time. When we say that biological heredity is a communication of information, we are coming back in a way to the Aristotelianism with which we started. In our exploration of the Hegelian theory of the relationship between the concept and life, we asked ourselves whether we would not find in a theory so closely aligned with Aristotelianism rather than in some intuitivist theory such as Bergson's. A means of interpretation that would be more reliable for the phenomena discovered by contemporary biologists and for the explanatory theories they offer for them. To say that biological heredity is a communication of information is, in a certain sense, a return to Aristotelianism, with which we started. My parenthesis here, we end up exactly where we departed. We arrived at the same spot as from where we wanted to go as well. If that entails admitting that there is in the living being a logos that is inscribed, conserved, and, very important, transmitted. Life has forever accomplished without writing. That is well before writing. and without any relation to writing. What humanity has sought through drawing, engraving, writing, printing, namely the transmission of messages. And from now on, the knowledge of life no longer resembles a portrait of life, was the description and classification of species. It does not resemble architecture or mechanics, which it did when it was simply anatomy and macroscopic physiology, which it did when it was simply anatomy. It resembles instead grammar, sentences, and syntax. In order to understand life, one must begin before reading it to decipher the message of life. And that, in emphasis, is DNA writing structure, the pharmacon of life, both teleological and random in an odd combination. Neither Cangelan nor Jacob problematized what they meant by this semiotics, or rather, this graphics of life, this non-phonetic writing that they claim to be without writing. And that they are ready to reinvest with all the values linked to logos in the most enduring Platonic, Aristotelian, Hegelian traditions, which is itself reread as a telos in progress. Indeed. Well done, Derrida. Some 10 years ago in Of Grammatology, in a chapter near the beginning that was titled The Program, I recall that, and I quote, the contemporary biologist speaks of writing and program in relation to the most elementary processes of information within the living cell. The point there was not, however, to reinvest the notion or the word program with the entire conceptual machine of logos and its semantics but to try to show that the appeal to a non-phonetic writing in genetics had to or should involve and incite an entire deconstruction of the logocentric machine rather than a return to Aristotle. That is the direction I wish to privilege by returning to the texts of Jacob and Cunningham on these problems of metaphor and the concept in the domain of the life sciences. And next time we will also take a detour, something I wanted to do today, through one of Nietzsche's first texts. The text title on the future of our educational institutions. We see at work there a critique of the state and its pedagogy, the sad want of the spirit among modern pedagogues. And the call for destruction and rebirth of the gymnasium. Where a kind of elitism, aristocratism, and anti-democratism, as well as a certain anti-Hegelianism, build a whole system of language upon a zoological conception of the mother tongue. A certain philosophy of life and a vitalist metaphoric of language. Which, drawing yet again from the most traditional Platonism, the logos is a zoon, I had to mention, in parenthesis, the existence, the being with small b's, is reactivated by the historical linguistics of the times. A historical linguistics that uses and abuses vitalist metaphors. In order to describe the evolution and transformation of languages. Isn't that interesting? The transformation of the university must, according to Nietzsche, happen not through linguistic science, but through a linguistic training that alone would be suitable for a language conceived as a living organism, rather than as an object of science. A living organism whose living character must be assumed, whose life, which is get from the mother in the mother tongue, or DNA ancestor or original down, must be accepted rather than killed off through an anatomy of it. Let me read the following as an exergy for the next session. Instead of that purely practical method of instruction by which the teacher accustoms his pupil to severe self-discipline in their own language, we find everywhere the rudiments of the historico-scholastic method of teaching the mother tongue. That is to say, people deal with it as if it were a dead language, and as if the present and future were under no obligation to it whatsoever. The historical method has become so universal in our time that even the living body of the language is sacrificed for the sake of anatomical study. As you remember said previously, that this is precisely where culture begins. Namely, in understanding how to treat the living thing as something living. And it is here too that the mission of the culture teacher begins in suppressing the urgent claims of historical interests. Wherever it is above all necessary to do properly and not merely to know properly. Our mother tongue, however, is a domain in which the pupil must learn how to do properly, and to do this practical and alone. The teaching of German is essential in our scholastic establishments. That ends the first session. We take a summary. Some other good parts. Page 23, we have a fantastic quote. Neither Cangelam nor Jacob problematized, second paragraph on page 23, what they meant by this semiotics, or rather this graphics of life, this non-phonetic writing that they claim to be without writing. And that they are so ready to reinvest with all values linked to logos in its most enduring Platonic, Aristotelian, Hegelian tradition, which is itself reread as a telos in progress. It is on page 23, second paragraph after the quote. Here we see that what they depart from, what they want to shy away from, is exactly what they enter into. Yes, it is. It's reread as a telos in progress, and that is within the text. The Aristotelian, Platonic, Hegelian they want to depart from, which they are departing from, is also what brings them forward. Life as essence, life as something transcendental, metaphysical, beyond this, is constantly in the text of Bernard. This is where we get convinced. That's from where the force of the text is coming, but it's marginalized. It's not seen. It is not a text for spirituality, for teleology or theology, but it needs those things to become strong. Isn't that just amazing? Yeah, 23. The first quote is also interesting, that there is a writing without writing. What humanity has sought, I'm reading for the fifth line here on page 23. What humanity has sought through drawing, engraving, writing, printing, namely the transmission of messages, that's what it's all about. Originary text, originary paintings, originary sayings, originary actions. This is the logocentric, Aristotelian, Platonic, Hegelian tendency. And it's so important to make the text strong, but it has to be denied because you don't want to end up there at the same time you do. This should be notified for the four horsemen of atheism or any other educators. Nietzsche is also pointing to this. Where the logos becomes a zoon, becomes the tongue itself. Page 24, first paragraph. It's a vitalist metaphorics of language in which, drawing yet again from the most traditional Platonism, the logos is a zone, is reactivated by the historical linguistics of the times. We are talking about the Brothers Grimm, maybe a bit later. It's used, that sort of knowledge from linguistics is used here to describe the evolution and transformation of languages turned over to other areas. Exactly as Bernard, Cangelan, Monod are using teleology, theology to make it work, and then marginalize it in the central theme, being completely hidden in a way, even though it's written letter by letter. No one has pointed this out. This is just grand. And the very last, the exergy for the next session, that we must do the mother tongue, and it has to be done properly as well, not only known properly. Known properly could be compared to the Hegelian Platonist way, but done, it means that it's alive. It's not an anatomical bad thing to be studied. It's very much alive. Alive in the sense you are doing it. It's an act. It's a living thing. I think we have to, next time, go into the logic of living. Maybe something from my colleague here, because the time is running out.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
I hear you
Do you hear
vaguely.
me?
It could be my fault as well.
Okay, I can type down so I can. So you can say in anatomy, the bones are more important than the flesh. Or the text is more important than the
Yes, well, very good. Fantastic, yeah. Or the text is more important than the calligraphy, the scripture, the handwriting, the hand that does it. The hand is somewhere marginalized. The act, the telos, if you like, the teleology, the purpose. They use teleology, they use religion to sort of make the argument for a materialistic, unintentional movement, which is the DNA reproducing itself automatically. That's the gist of that stuff. I'll have a look at the other. Yes, definitely. The nouns are more important than the verb. Look at Noam Chomsky. Life is supposedly more important than death or living. Yeah. Life as an essence, as Bernard is caught in the act. Why has no one else pointed this out? Nobody said to the Four Horsemen or the modern educational system in Sweden. It needs to be pointed out. Maybe that could be something for Per Evert or anyone else. It doesn't get any stronger when it is actually in what they are saying. Yeah, it does. In the Chomskyan approach, it's almost like verbs are adjuncts called nominal phrases and peace. It's so weird. Once upon a time, me taking classes with Elisabeth Alsen, which was her name. I got this stone eerie feeling when verbs were reduced to adjuncts to the nouns. It's just odd. Nominal phrases, that was the smallest atom. That was the arche in the general grammar, the universal grammar, the UG with big letters of Noam Chomsky. And I think Chomsky is such a good example, thanks, Kalle, because you see here, this was going on before. Another form of linguistics, the one of the Brothers Grimm or even later, is used to show what progress is, how Indo-European turns into Aryan languages, which turns into Proto-Germanic languages, which turns into Germanic language. They use that. These are what makes text strong, makes them convincing. But it needs to be in the text to have force. Marginalized, yes, in the central argument, but very often smack in the text, not hidden in footnote or anything like that. Out there in the light. Well, I say thank you very much. I think we have some good force to go further with the other text. I say thank you very much for listening. I will now end the recording.